Moving now to a more general question, and this is my question, it's on heritage protection and climate change or climate resilience. Is the protection of heritage a means of assisting the community to mitigate the impacts of climate change? I refer in the question to the reuse of buildings, reducing the demand for new building materials, and in consequence, the energy demands that production requires. So is the protection of heritage, do you see it as a means of assisting the community to mitigate the impacts of climate change? Dr. Close?
That's an incredibly interesting and useful lens to put over heritage. It does reinforce the need for natural heritage protection through the heritage agreements that I referred to earlier. It also interestingly points to the need for us to be flexible and adaptive in the way in which we allow people to use and reuse heritage. So if we make heritage the province of only the very wealthy or the state, returning to the very beginning of our conversation, then it becomes very difficult to use in a meaningful way that you've described in the context of climate change, where we need to be able to reuse what we already have. So it does argue for a degree of flexibility and adaptability in making sure that what we already have is protected and is cherished, but is also genuinely able to be part of how people choose to live, how we have workers working. So I think that's an incredibly useful lens that I hadn't thought of, and I'm jealous that you thought of it first. Well done.
Thank you. The Honourable Frank Pangallo.
Thank you very much, Chair. And can I just read this quote that I came across during debate in the upper house recently, and it's from a Sydney urban architect by the name of Francesca Morrison. Now, she spoke in Adelaide during the Adelaide Festival of Arts in the mid-80s. And Francesca said, and I quote, "Buildings will become cheaper and nastier each year. They are not inspiring, environmentally uplifting or satisfying. They are basically brutal, alien, soul-destroying. At the rate we are going, our cultural continuity will be severed. It's not just our Victorian or colonial heritage, it's our complete historical and cultural consciousness which is at stake." Now, that was at the height of a debate similar to one what we're having today, more than 30 years ago, and it hasn't changed. Now, I look out over the city of Adelaide from my place, and what I'm seeing is an ugly skyline now of concrete and glass. It is actually quite disappointing to see monoliths of modernism sprouting at a great rate, and now we're seeing arguments about or challenges of which is going to be the highest building. We're going to see a building that goes up to 55 stories, and Adelaide is suddenly losing that image it once had. Of course, we used to call it the city of the churches, and then at one time it was called the Athens of the South. I think now we're getting to the point, unless something is done, that it will become Ad Vegas. It'll be a cross between the Gold Coast and Las Vegas. And this is because I think because of the planning code and other issues, we have really lost sight of protecting what the city was all about, what Colonel Light planned, and the retention of some of these historic buildings, and also the feel of what Adelaide presented. I'm really lamenting watching all these skyscrapers going up and dwarfing some of our great buildings that are there, and also the prospect that we're going to lose more.
Thank you. The Honourable Sam DeLuc.
Thank you so much. And I think Frank raised a lot of really important points. But I think what the changing skyline and the ugliness of the skyline has been going on now for decades. And I think, before my time, but the loss of the exhibition building to be replaced by the Napier building was one of the biggest travesties of the time. But maybe, Frank, one good point about these new skyscrapers is that the Schultz building on North Terrace is finally being blocked. We've been putting up ugly buildings for a long time. But to Christine, to your point, yes, adaptive reuse is so important in the climate change. The way we use buildings and space and footprint. But of course, I think, and going back to the very first question, it's how do we learn from heritage? And of course, I think our forebears built so well. They built for the climate, housing and our grand buildings of yesteryear. tall ceilings, big verandas, eaves, trees planted around them, have a few really hot days before they got really, really hot, and they cooled really, really quickly. These days, the way we build a modern building or a house is air conditioning 24/7. It's so many are facing east-west when they shouldn't be. We don't, we are planting the wrong trees that go with it, concrete all around them. We're not really, using grey water correctly in our homes. We can do so much better by actually learning from how we built homes and buildings 100, 130, 140 years ago.
Thanks. And the last word on this topic to the Honourable Robert Sims, representing the Greens.
Look, I agree with everything that's been said. I guess the only thing I'd add is for us as Greens, we see these discussions around heritage and climate and the environment as being intrinsically linked. It's been a long-term philosophy of our party. If you look at the Green Ban movement and the leadership of the late and great Jack Mundey and the Building Labourers Federation, they recognised and they worked closely with environmentalists and in the union movement to protect these vital buildings. And they saw that there wasn't this dichotomy between the environment on the one hand and the economy on the other, and that actually we needed to advance these things together. And I think if we want to look at the correlation between climate and protecting heritage and the importance of that, then we need to look at the tragedy of what's been unfolding on our parklands, where really governments of both persuasions often view the parklands as being free land. And when there's a development project or a public asset, let's put it on the Adelaide parklands is the mantra, rather than the consideration of the impact that has in terms of our city's response to climate change and the impact that has in terms of reducing our green space. So absolutely, these things are connected.